G'day, Scott. How are you today, mate?
I am good, thank you, Sonny. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, mate. I'm well. It's late here for me, early there for you,
So we're both
but
tired.
both tired, but here for the greater good to discuss teaching martial arts, which is what I enjoy doing, and I believe you do also. So I'm interested to delve into things. So recently on the podcast, I have been speaking to people about the ecological approach to teaching and learning,
hmm
or constraints-led method, and so far it's just been in the realms of jujitsu or grappling, however you want to slice it. And you yourself have started teaching it or using it to teach striking and mixed martial arts. So that's something that I really want to focus on. First, before we get into that, I should bring up, I think you're the person responsible for about maybe 7 or 8 years ago, me going into the gym and everyone trying to no-gi baseball bat choke me. Is that
Oh, you're
correct?
starting off great with some flattery. Yeah, that was my my
So
5 minute claim to fame.
there
I've
was
got
a
a
there was a
highlight reel for baseball jokes.
yeah, there was a clip that went super viral of you no-gi baseball bat choking a bunch of people in competition, putting them out cold, and I remember it vividly. Everyone was trying no-gi baseball bat chokes for a while, and
Did you manage to get it into your toolbox?
not wasn't my move, but perhaps if we'd learned it ecologically, it would have been.
There you
We
go.
were going
Maybe.
step by step, direct instruction.
Well, I pulled
So
one off last weekend at the ADCC Open, so it still works.
still works. That's the ultimate test then, as long as we're still using it. And so you actually use the ecological approach to teach mixed martial arts and striking, which is very interesting. So, I mean, the first question is how your teaching philosophy has changed over time as an MMA coach, and then what led you to start using this approach.
Okay, so I've been coaching now for a little over 10 years. The gym that I'm with just now with my partner, we're going into our fourth year. And for better or worse, we've tried to go fully ecological. Now, I know there's some tension in the community right now, and people are saying it's all ecological, and everyone's kind of getting into their trenches. It's an alternative view on how we learn, but it's something we believe in sticking to the principles. So when ecological advocates can come over as being, I think we can come over as being a little zealous about it. It's because there, we believe there's a way the body learns to move and interact with the world, and so it doesn't make sense to do some of the more other traditional approaches to kind of building techniques and bit by bit, part by part, and putting them all together. We see it more as a kind of holistic kind of approach to learning how to move and solve problems.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, go ahead, sorry.
So those ways then of teaching people learning how to move, I assume that you came from, like most people, traditional direct instruction background,
Yeah.
where teacher focus, telling people the exact steps of how to apply a move,
Oh,
and
the
then
every step. I was just as passionate about when I was coaching and approaching it from the other way. So it would be meticulous detail, especially in the striking, and the the ideal build, trying to get students to perfect and um, bring out that ideal technique in them, the perfect technique. Generally in isolation, through drills, through pad work, through all this kind of shadow boxing and stuff, and then expected to put it all back in. And I think that was where I was starting to find that there didn't seem to be a great transfer, or it didn't seem quite as polished or pretty when we put it back into the sparring or the system. Um, Subsequently, after coaching, I went back to school to do a bachelor's in coaching science, and that sent me down a few different rabbit holes. I'm not exactly sure when I came across the ecological approach. I'd previously been studying a lot of old the traditional methods, schema theory, Schmidt stuff, very heavy on information processing, and then I found this kind of alternative approach, and it just made a lot of sense to me. And I dabbled with it in my old gym that I was coaching at, and again, I thought this is the way to do it. Let's put my money where my mouth is and open my own place again with my partner, and we'll go whole hog ecological.
Yeah. So, what did you think or find? I mean, you mentioned that you weren't seeing as much crossover, but what did you find were the biggest limitations or downsides to using the traditional approach to teaching striking?
Well, the whole thing was transfer. I mean, presumably that's why we came to practice, right? And one thing I think is important, Sonny, I'm talking about this from a skilled action perspective, not a technical perspective, not even from hobbyist people who want to come in and learn the sport and crack the pads and have fun. I'm looking at it purely from a perspective of can we make skillful martial artists and fighters. So I think it's an important distinction there to differentiate between skill and technique.
Yes, I think so. What you're describing there is, I guess, the technique being an idealized version of how something could be done, and the skill being the resulting application
The
of it.
application, yeah. The
Yeah,
application in a live, unpredictable, chaotic environment, which I think really that's what a fight is, yeah.
a
That's
hundred
even what
percent.
sparring is to a lesser extent, just not quite as violent.
Yeah, and I think in martial arts, it's also you are running a business, so there is also
Sure.
another lens of retention where people may take comfort in doing drills that they can be familiar with, and repeating with it. Could potentially be some benefits to sticking to drills like that rather than throwing them perhaps in the deep end, which would probably lead me to go on to how do you in how do you go about the process then? Someone walks into the gym,
Hmm.
first lesson striking, and how obviously we might, in a traditional method, we might just show jab cross hook,
Hmm.
something, maybe a jab, whatever. How do you though go about teaching striking without demonstrating the technique of a jab cross, or giving them a step by step, rolling the toe over, however you want to describe it?
So two things there. I don't throw them in the deep end. I throw them in the shallow end, but I throw them in, and I think what draws people to martial arts. I think everyone low key would love to fight, or would like to fight, or would like to know, or be able, or be competent at fighting. And I think maybe what the reason there's an appeal to just drilling and just getting the techniques in one. There's two things in that. One, that's kind of how the sport's always been delivered, and it's a safe way. It can be very very intimidating to spar. People don't want to get punched in the face. They don't want to get hurt. I completely understand that. Most people are hobbyists. Uh, However, again, by throwing them in the shallow end and getting them to spar, I think it's tremendously engaging, tremendously fun, and I think you can, and I think that's what we've been able to do for the most part in my gym is build a culture where people are able to spar without getting hurt regularly and routinely and daily.
Okay, so are you saying then? I guess this would make sense given what we're discussing in terms of live training. That on people's first day they will be sparring, obviously in a
Immediately.
constrained method. You say immediately.
Immediately.
All right, this is wild. Tell me how this works.
Okay, so before I blow maybe striking coaches' heads apart here, I think there's a way we learn, and this is what informs us: ecological psychology, dynamic systems. I'm going to try and avoid the buzzwords today because I don't think they're that helpful, Sonny, for the conversation. Um, but so again, this is the approach. Ecological, and I'll use that word a lot, but we see skill development as relationships. Okay, it's a relational thing. As something moves or something changes in our environment, that we couple our action to that. Okay, so I don't think that's that's not controversial. Even we would all agree we see things in our world, or we perceive things, we pick up on things in our environment. Just say we're in a fight, we're striking, you're moving around, and with that information, I am acting accordingly, right? Again, it is early here. So the question was, when someone comes in sparring right away. But my main point about striking is, I think striking is very, very hard. It's hard in the sense that it's challenging to learn, and it has its risks, but it's quite simple. And what I mean is simple, and we've all heard the quip, it's being able to hit and not being hit. That pretty much is the basis for it. So the reason I advocate for sparring right away is because I want to start building that relationship right away. The central problem to me in striking is head trauma. There's no other real problem that we need to navigate. There's lesser problems, but that's the main problem. So my endeavor has always been, can we, presumably there's a threshold of how much damage, how much force you can take in the head before it starts causing issues, and we try and stay on the very, very low end of that. But my ultimate vision was, could we, and that was still an open question, could we develop competent, successful fighters purely through this gamified, all live sparring methodology from day one? So we're not, you mentioned about teaching jabs, crosses, 1, 2, 3s, all this kind of stuff. So I know it sounds peculiar or bizarre that I don't do any of that. What I let that do is evolve and emerge over time. So when I talk about starting sparring right away, we remove head contact altogether. So again, there's pushback. Is that authentic? Is that really fighting? No, but then I would pad work, bad work, drilling, all that. That neither is that. So this is a middle ground that we're scaffolding on future skills, if that makes sense. So when someone comes in for the first day, and I had 2 new guys come in last night, brand new, we'll set them out in little games. It might just be boxing to start with, no head contact boxing, and I don't tell them anything else. I don't tell them how to stand. We might give a brief demo of what the game might look like, and it's just trying to score and tag shoulders, flanks, and the trunk.
Okay, fascinating, because I mean, even the hit and don't get hit saying, I mentioned this to my kickboxing coach this afternoon. It's going to be having this conversation, and he, like, that was the exact phrase he used. What would you tell him? Just hit and don't get hit, shins on chins, left, right, good night, go, away you go. Which seems it's so far removed from how things would work in any sort of traditional gym. I would agree with you that just if you're not striking to the head, it could be considered similar to pad work or bad work, which isn't completely representative of an actual fight or sparring. But the idea that we are not also, teaching footwork or any kind of, basic idealized form would be, very hard to digest for a lot of people. Okay, so let's scratch a bit. Let's scratch down on that, because now that I see a lot. First of all, I think for the most part, coaches are well-meaning. They care, right? They give a shit. But what is coaching? What informs a coach and how they design practice? They take activities, drills, sparring activities, games, whatever, and they put that into practice because they believe that's what's going to transfer into skill, yeah, or that's what's going to create learning opportunities. And we're all trying to do that. This approach, and again, digging down and just some of the principles of the approach in the science, suggests to us and informs our practice that it always needs to be live, unscripted, and interactive. And if we believe that, then it doesn't make a lot of sense to break that apart. I'm sure you've heard of the perception action loop. I don't think the controversial or radical part is that we are saying that
we're acting with our partner as they move. It informs how we move and back and forth, because every training room in the world, presumably, especially for MMA, kickboxing, whatever, there's an element of sparring, there's an element of liveness. So I don't think that's controversial at all. The radical part in ecological dynamics is that we don't take in all this information and our brain does all this complex processing and then selects an action. They're inseparable. It's a constant loop. So whenever we're interacting with the world, we're building personal relationships based on what our bodies and our capabilities are. And that's why I put them in sparring games right away, because I need to start building these relationships right away. Now, I don't care what it looks like, and that's what's going to bring us back to technique. I really don't care what it looks like. I care how effective it is. Now, and we'll get on to a little bit of Izzy and Sean Strickland, because I think this was perhaps there's something to scratch around with there. Sean's ability to almost see everything coming. I think our approach has a good answer for that. I wasn't quite as surprised or befuddled when Sean pulled it off last weekend. I think what Sean's, well, let's get on to that just now. We see expertise as the detection and the sensitivity of information and being able to act upon that. So it's really important that information, or at least the information, is similar to what you're going to see in a fight or what you're going to experience in sparring. So for the hour or 90 minutes that someone's on our mat, we want to give them that experience to the kind of information, and I'm using that word as, everything, where your partner is in space, the openings, the opportunities you have to strike or block or whatnot. We need to put them in that situation right away. So again, into the shallow end, we start off with a little bit of tagging, a little body tag. We'll add low kicks, teeps, roundhouses, switch kicks, all that, and we develop that over time through small little games. But it's always somewhat unpredictable and interactive, because what we're trying to also develop is not just being able to perceive, detect the information and act accordingly. It's being able to put some decision making into the activities all the time. So it's not just a passive rehearsal of drills and techniques. You're constantly figuring out through trial and error, this worked, that almost worked, and this kind of thing. And that slowly compounds into skill development for us. Now, going back to your question about technique, that's interesting for me. So let's take the ideal jab, and we could teach the ideal jab from a very static, isolated way, and every coach has their own slight interpretation of that. But for the most part, most striking coaches will have similar qualities they'll be looking for in a jab, which is great. So I'll grant you that there's a perfect ideal jab that will be quick and it will be powerful. I'll grant all that. I don't see that much during a fight. I see jabby hooks, hooky jabs, jabby uppercuts, uppercut hooks, this kind of thing, So it never even looks to me like the same strike twice. So it becomes increasingly absurd to try and develop this ideal movement and expect it to appear in sparring or fights, because I don't see it appearing in sparring or fights. And I'm wondering if you see it, but I certainly don't see it. And if you slow down even the highest level of UFC fighting, it's pretty chaotic. It's pretty sloppy. So that would be my pushback on why even bother.
Sure, and this is something I had thought about, in that while I'd grant that there may not be, or there's certainly not an ideal jab that would be agreed upon across every single coach in the world, and certainly in a live situation, we may not see the ideal jab. It's going to be countless variations of timing, place, everything, height, weight, weather. There's going to be countless or infinite different jabs, we could say. But I would still put forward a case that even with all those variations of jabs, there is enough similar about them, that there could still be utility in showing a generalized version and then letting the individual explore from there.
Well, we're pretty close, right? Because we are letting the individual explore. I mean, I can explain. I don't really even call them jabs. I would call them leads or whatever.
Sure.
But again, regardless of which side you're approaching this for, I don't think it's controversial to say, even if you had, let's say, the most perfect stylistic, ideal, aesthetically pleasing jab, you still need to be able to find a way to land that effectively. Which, what does that mean? You have to pick up on the opportunity, the timing to be able to land it effectively. And the only way to do that is by doing that in a live situation where you're able to. Now, I was trying to avoid the buzzwords, but affordance is a really important word in ecological dynamics. And affordance is just an opportunity or an invite to act. A window of opportunity in fighting. They're emerging, they're decaying all the time. So we need to be as sensitive to these as quickly as possible and as highly sensitive to them. And that can only, in my opinion, my understanding, that can only happen through live, unscripted sparring or fighting. So again, I want to start building that from day one. I don't really care. And then it's a mixed message if I'm telling people this is how you have to move your body. Then I'm telling them to explore and just find effective ways to achieve the goal that they're looking for. Just say it's the jab or the lead hand. Are you able to routinely exploit these opportunities with the lead hand without being scored on, taking us back to the hit and not being hit? That is where skill resides for me, and it doesn't really matter what it looks like.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I think you are right with, I'll take it back with pads not being representative, and because I think even with pad work, people would probably agree that you don't want to just be standing static and, just getting into a rhythm. I think good pad holders move around, they'll put the pads down, try and get reaction-based timing, so they are trying to simulate the reactions as much as possible that you could experience in a fight, but of course it's never going to be like you would have in a fight, and that the form of sparring would be closer to those situations. But there would be, and another thing I probably would say is, in terms of keeping your hands up, which I imagine would still be something I could hear in your gym. I'm not sure, but there's one thing I always find interesting is that even, in the midst of a fight, that is still something that, you might have to yell from the corner, even though that it would be the idealized version all the time, over and over everywhere.
I think we can yell it, but I think if you're in these constant live engagements, that again, the intentionality aspect of what we talk about. So when we boil ecological dynamics down, we're looking for, there's a few things we refer to, right? You have your overall intention, right? What are you trying to do here? And then we then talk about attention, which you then start. Attention for me is just your, pointing your perceptual awareness to an area. So let's stick on the jab just now, okay? So over time, you're going to see these opportunities to land, and what's really important to discuss here or add on to these opportunities or affordances. They're unique to the person themselves. So, what's your striking background, Sonny?
Just Muay Thai and kickboxing from the get-go.
So, and what height are you?
179 centimeters.
Okay. I've got to do the do you know what that is?
I don't know.
Are you generally tall or are you generally short? Yeah.
Just average.
We're average. So, analogy crumbling as we speak here.
Sorry.
But if we're standing in front of each other, or we're standing in front of a similar opponent, you'll be picking up on affordances or opportunities that perhaps I won't, and vice versa. That speaks to our experience, that speaks to the relationships we've built, but it also speaks to the length of our arms, the speed of our shots and whatnot. And it's very, very our bodies are very, very sensitive to this, uniquely what we're capable of, and this underpins affordance. So when you hear the word affordance thrown around as an opportunity, it's only an opportunity if you've built that relationship and you have the capacity and the capability to achieve that goal. One of the analogies I like, perhaps we come up to if we had like a gap and someone said, "Can you jump that gap?" Well, there's the obvious distance of the gap. You say, "Yeah, of course, I can just step over it." And then there's a gap that's so far that you think, "Well, I could never jump that." Right? Are you kind of with me here? Then there'll be this area where you're thinking, "I think I can just jump that," or I may be able to. But we're very, very sensitive to that. You would be able to perceive a gap or a distance that you feel you'd be able to jump. But that's going to be unique to Sonny. It's even going to be unique to how you feel in the day. Are you tired? Are you feeling, are you full of piss and vinegar and vin and vigor and you think you can jump it? We're very, very sensitive. So this always tightly coupled what we're capable of and what the problem is. And again, this is all relational, and this is why I try and start building these relationships right away from day one.
And so that makes sense, right? In the terms of the live environment, the chaos of fighting or sparring, any self-defense situation, it's completely understandable that the ability to perceive what's going on in the environment and act accordingly is going to be the ultimate driver of your movement. It seems though that there's still, perhaps it is just spending so much time working on those idealized forms and seeing, being attuned to what you would consider common errors or common vulnerabilities that could be exploited if someone's perceiving them. That feels like, if from my own personal experience, that if we were just to use that style of coaching from day one, the gut feeling would be for me, and I'm sure it's shared by many other coaches, that we would never be able to develop effective strikers. It's
sure.
Just like,
and yep. So that is a extremely valid and kind of an obvious pushback, right? We've just had so I've always believed it. I've always believed, because I'm on the mats daily, and I see these. You can even call them techniques. I see these skills, these movements, qualities emerge. Okay, so I see them develop over time. So there's two things here. I don't measure learning on the day. I don't think it's possible to measure learning on the day. My metric for learning are my students starting to routinely able to be effective over time with whatever they're working on. We've just had our fight team's kind of coming of age now, just our amateur fight team, and the initial pushback was, again, I completely understand this. This can't be done. You'll never be able to produce anyone that's competent at fighting through this method. Well, we're showing that that's not the case now, right? We've got kids going in there who are looking very, very competent, very, very fluid, because, again, they've built up this movement repertoire, these movement qualities, purely organically. So it's very unique to them, and they're all very different stylistically, but they're doing well in the cage now. So I feel the conversation's changing a little bit. It's like, okay, well, you can get them to that level, but you won't be able to get them much further. I say, okay, well, hold my beer, right? It's going to take a while, but I think we're going to get there. And I'm happy to deal with the pushback, because that's the pushback I get. So then sometimes it's, and I hear this again for grappling, well, this is no good for beginners. Or, well, maybe it's good for beginners, but it's not going to get you to a higher level. So what is it? We believe there's a way the body learns to move, and the body learns to move skillfully. And again, all I'm doing is adhering to that. So it doesn't make sense for me to break it apart. Pad work, isolated movement, do it till the cows come home in your own time. When we're together with our training mates, we're going to stick in that live games based play sparring scenario 100% of the time. Now, you're talking about keeping your hands up and whatnot. I don't worry about that either. In fact, I don't particularly worry where the hands are. Are they going to be in the right place at the right time? But again, the intention is no one likes getting hit in the face. No one likes to fall over. So by staying in these sparring games, the hands come up themselves. There's really no need to talk about keeping your hands up. Because if your hands are down and you're getting tagged and whacked, then that takes care of itself. And it seems like it seems like this has been a hyperbole or whatnot, but I do believe that sparring will, if it's scaled properly, it corrects all errors.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we can look at some, some gyms who, the shootbox comes to mind, as obviously they still had, solid instruction, but, well renowned for lots of sparring, heavy sparring, and I think you would also get agreement across many coaches that the intensity and the belief that an individual fighter can gain from undergoing that kind of training can overpower any kind of idealized technique on a given night. That just having such strong belief and that kind of experience can overcome, which maybe is a Sean Strickland versus Izzy comparison as well. And I'd even say that in terms of having success with students, I mean, I feel that probably, and we see this even just with individual gyms, even if you were to gain one world champion, it would be easy to write it off as, oh, well, that's an outlier of just one person. So I wouldn't be sure unless it was, like tons of people just doing, scoring world championships, maybe that it would be, that anyone would be completely satisfied, and that's hard enough to achieve at any individual gym because it depends so much on where you are and how many people you've got coming in and whatnot. Right.
That's an interesting point, Sonny. That's an interesting point, but I wouldn't. No, I would probably be guilty of it, right? So if I had if at the end of the day we produce a world champion, will I say it's because of this whole approach? Sure, I will, right? But
of course.
But until then, but in reality, I look at development over an hour basis, right? So for every hour, you take two novices. Let's just assume for this little thought experiment that they're identical twins or they have the exact same capacities. Hour for hour, what's going to be the best bang for the buck? I strongly believe, of course I believe it because that's what I'm doing. I strongly believe that the approach we are taking will hour for hour produce a better, more developed, skilled product at the end of it. Now, we're very, very complex. Human beings are complex. Environments are complex. There's all sorts of things going on. There's mentality, there's diet, there's socio-cultural constraints. There's all sorts of things. We're very good at telling stories as human beings, right? And so when you see a gym having success, we often attribute it to either the coach or we attribute it to the methodology. I tend to attribute it to again, looking from the perspective I'm looking at, look at city kickboxing just now. Tremendous athletes, tremendous kind of culture, presumably. I'm not privy to what goes on in there. I often think the fighters actually, it's everything just coming together beautifully. You're getting the right collection of individuals on the mat. I do think coaches can be instrumental and very, very important, but I think they can also be rate limiters in some sense when they overthink the sport. I think if you get a group of guys or women that are driven on the mats and they know how to learn, they do the lion's share of the lifting of the skill development. And you tend to see that in gyms, right? So gyms will blow up and they'll be wildly successful, and then that'll start to dissipate and decay, and then another gym will pop up. So that's telling me perhaps it's more about the fighters and the guys on the mat, or again the girls on the mat themselves, rather than the coach or the methodology. Because of course there's been gyms that have stood the test of time, but for most part they're jockeying for position. Perhaps city kickboxing will continue to be dominant for the rest of time. I suspect though that over time other gyms will develop and they'll just hit the sweet spot.
Yeah, I think it seems to be that things do go in waves at the very least. That the gyms will rise or fall. Certain whatever the culture could potentially change. I do know that City Kickboxing are very very systematic in their approach to teaching striking, and that obviously has translated into their fight team. But someone did ask me the other week, what is it, the coach or the fighter? And, gun to the head type question. And I answered that in the moment, well, the fighter. There are also those people that probably doesn't matter where they go, probably doesn't matter what they do. This guy was always going to get good.
Sure.
This guy, whatever it was with them, they were always going to be a good fighter, and perhaps in those instances, the coach's role was not to get in the way, and that was a good coach. So,
and every individual needs. I mean, you'll learn that as a coach too, Sonny. Every individual is truly unique. They need something different. Some need their hand held a little more. Some just want to come in and get after it. My job really is setting the practice design and making sure they're not hurting each other. That's my primary goal on the mats. I'm really not involved too much. I kind of do most of my work on the front end. I design the practice loosely. I'll come in and I'll see where that challenge is. And sometimes it's an epic failure. Sometimes it seems wildly engaging, and we play in that space. Now, MMA is a fun sport for me to coach because I think for the most part we can get a lot out of it. We can train pretty authentically and leave the head alone for the most part. We can attack other parts of the body. We've got our grappling, our wrestling, our clinching, our groundwork, our wall work. So our practices are pretty, they're all very lively, but they're all fairly authentic. Again, the compromise and the trade-off we take is we don't thump each other in the head. Never, ever. And once you start scratching down, there's a lot of conventional wisdom in the sport, like you need to spar hard this often, you need to do this. I mean, even if you go further back, you need to do the road work and blah, blah, blah. You need to wear headgear, all this stuff. When you start scrutinizing it a little bit, it doesn't hold up that well. So if the conventional wisdom here is saying one thing and you look behind the curtain and say, well, that's probably not right. Well, what else is there? What else might we be telling ourselves? Other stories that we tell ourselves that it might not actually be that true. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm kind of letting the science and my experience as I go inform practice as I go, and it changes as I go. But again, I'm seeing good results, and the conversation's changing now because 4 years ago, when I was screaming into the void, now it seems everyone's picking up on the ecological, the buzzword and whatnot, and it's and we're games based and blah blah blah. And I've believed it for a while, and I'm 4 years in now, and I'm seeing a lot of good results. And back to our original thing, people are drawn to martial arts because I think they want to fight. They don't want to get hurt. Most of them don't even want to compete. But we have a ton of people who move beautifully and they never hit each other in the head. They're just not interested. But they can do they can get still again 80% out of the MMA game without of course there'll be accidents and they'll bump their head and they'll get kneed when they're rolling around or taken down. That kind of stuff will happen. But for the most part, I've got a ton of students who just do no head contact MMA, and they're pretty scrappy.
Yeah, and I mean I feel that I feel that the way that people will come into a gym for striking as opposed to grappling, I think there is a common understanding that probably everyone will believe that they throw a good one too already, or there's probably a common I can throw a good punch.
How often do you hear that? Have you any experience, son? Well, nothing formal. I'm like, okay, so
exactly.
Come on,
right?
Yeah.
Well, like it's a classic story everywhere, or just that everyone believes they can fight efficiently.
Right, everyone believes that, Sonny. But in what universe do you think you'd be good at this stuff on the first day? what other sport would you pick that you thought you could come in? If fighting's weird for guys, guys think they can fight. And you wouldn't assume to be able to play basketball or golf or anything else on your first day competently. So, yeah, fighting is very unique in that sense, because there's a lot of ego and bravado and manliness caught up in it all. So when new people perhaps come to the gym, or guys come in the gym thinking they can fight, I beg to differ.
Yeah. So, do you feel that there is a difference then in how this can be applied for grappling as opposed to striking? Because my own personal belief is, well, for a pure beginner, grappling, it doesn't make sense. It's going to be too complex to understand. People don't really know the game, whereas striking, it's easier. You hit and don't get hit. People can understand that.
Simpler. I don't think it's necessarily easier. I think grappling is way more complex. But again, this is another. I think both sides are guilty of misrepresenting or characterizing the other sides. I hear it all the time. I'm guilty of it too. That we think, well, the traditional approach is coming in for grappling and shrimping down the mats for 15 minutes and a 50-point technical rehearsal. That we're going to drill statically, then 3 open rows at the end. For the most part, gyms have moved on. They're not like that at all. So there's a big overlap here, and it's unfortunate that, and I'm guilty of it too, right? It's unfortunate that both sides are kind of butting heads and not finding common ground, because there's a huge overlap. And what I'm hearing now is that, well, this is an ecological practice and this is an information processing practice. For me, there isn't an ecological or information processing practice. There's practice, and there's how we think the body learns to move. And I could get you. We could learn to throw a jab ecologically. We could learn to throw an idealized, perfect jab ecologically. It's what we think's going on with the body and its interaction with the environment that's a little different. That we're not these passive. We're not this receiver of information, and then we're not saying the brain's not involved. We're just saying it's not doing quite the heavy lifting or selecting from a bunch of options that we thought. Now, I'm a little agnostic on that too, because a couple of my friends who are deep in the space, academics and whatnot, they're starting to push back at me and introduce some other ideas that maybe this ecological dynamics I'm talking about, maybe there's more to the story, and I'm open to that. But at the moment, you have to pick a side. I think it's good for a coach to have some kind of theoretical underpinning. Otherwise, what are we doing? We're just throwing shit at the wall, or we are copy pasting what other coaches doing. And I don't think. I think that's a limiting belief. That's a limiting behaviour. I think. Coaches don't need to agree with me, or might think, listen to this thing, this is absurd, this is bullshit. But that's fine. But then talk to me, or at least have something that informs your practice. And if it's just copying what's always been done, or trying shit out, I don't think that's a great way to go either.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of realms for innovation and improvement. I do like the way you were recommending, or just this could be a better way to use a set hour to increase people's skill levels. So, I mean, how I would do things currently for MMA is I do run, we'll stick with jab games, which will be one person jamming to the head, one to the body, swapping it over, and then both to the head, both to the body, then adding jabs to double legs for MMA. But I would only do that after people have learned those skills in isolation currently. And I would also...
I'm sorry, I'd be picky about the techniques in isolation.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. And
well picked up on.
No, but it's an important distinction, because I'm talking from a skills perspective, not a technique. I'll grant you that this is not the best way to. This isn't the way to get people looking pretty. I'll grant you that. It can be really fucking ugly. I don't care what it looks like. I care whether it's effective. And what I'm trying to say is, if it's scaled properly and you build people up over time at the appropriate challenge level, the effectivity of it all, it does appear, even if the technique doesn't so much. You know, you're from a part of the world now, and I'm in awe of all the great Muay Thai fighters and that there. But these kids growing up, I'm sure they did all the pad work and the drilling and stuff too, but a lot of their game was just play. It was just play. It was this dance that they were in, this interpersonal system that they're in, that they're learning to move and interact and pick up with. They're I know I'm getting a bit kind of wooey here, but you know, they're at one within this dynamic two-person tango that they're going in, and that can all come through play as far as I'm concerned. You spoke about the drilling and getting people there, or we spoke about the hour of training. What is the opportunity cost of holding your gloves up and letting someone practice a 1, 2, 3? What is the pad holder getting out of that? So when it's always interactive, to an extent it's unscripted, to an extent it's a little chaotic, and to an extent there's some decision making to be that's baked into the pie. I think that the opportunity cost is removed, and you can get a whole hour of learning. And I differentiate technique and skill. I differentiate between teaching and learning. I don't really care about teaching. I care about learning. What are my people learning? It's a different role for me, Sonny.
Yeah, and I would agree with you there, especially with the example of Muay Thai. I think it's often, talked about how they don't spar hard, they play, it's playful sparring because they're fighting every weekend. I have looked at that, though, as they're also growing up within the culture of Muay Thai and starting at a very young age. And I've heard that
it epitomizes ecological living and ecological approach.
Exactly right. So that, and I've looked at that as well. Yeah, that's great. But in the Western world, we got 1 hour, 2 hours to work with guys. The ecological approach that the Thais would be using they've got heaps more. They've got more time to be spending on this. They're starting at a very young age. We're getting people coming in 20, mid-20s, 30s.
So isn't it more important, Sonny, to get as much as you can out of that hour?
100%. I'd say
it might be more important. I mean, it's like before I be careful what I say here, because on your side of the world, but I'm having a conversation later today with Sean Mishka. He's a NFL skills coach from the Emergency. They have their own podcast and stuff. He was on suicide watch last week after Izzy lost, because he thinks Izzy's the perfect athlete. And we actually had a bit, because I wasn't that surprised. I've been watching Sean, talking about Sean for a while now. I wouldn't advocate for that intensity of sparring, but the fact that, and again, whether Sean came up through a more traditional approach or whatever, but it seems to be he's always engaged in some kind of live sparring, right? To watch Sean through an aesthetics lens, and I don't think he looks bad, but to watch Sean through an aesthetics lens compared to Izzy, they're like two different fighters. But the way Sean was able to see things coming, and you can, whatever, Izzy, Grant, he could have had an off day or whatever. And stylistically, I think there was maybe some issues there, he wasn't able to quite adapt or overcome the problem that Sean was presenting. But it was a little bit of a masterclass Sean put on with being evasive and being able to land that 1-2. And if Sean was throwing that 1-2 on a pad or a bag, would a technical coach have something to say about that? Possibly, right? Sean's jab's interesting to me because the hand seems to leave first and the rest of the body catches up. And I'm wondering why that's just maybe why his opponents aren't seeing it as much. Again, I would attribute that to the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours he's had of sparring and the countless reads and the countless opportunities he's had to try and land that jab or that lead hand while not getting scored back on.
And that does make me think that, like, I would agree that, yeah, that time spent sparring in those live live situations is, critical. Although, even with Sean, it's like, well, he probably came up learning the traditional method as well to start with, and then maybe had those coaches who probably didn't get in the way of him, or maybe wouldn't let them get in the way. Seems like that kind of character that he would do his own thing anyway. And there's other people I think in MMA that you could point to that where their style is just so unique and it just works for them, and it's probably not
who we're thinking
to be
who
able
we're
to be
here?
replicated.
If Tony Ferguson.
Diaz, perfect example. Yep,
guys like that. I mean,
I'd say even Dominic Cruz. Is another one that they fight in a very particular way, and as much as people would try and replicate it, there's not a replicant from them.
So this adds on to another layer, another consideration that if just say you're coming from an environment where a coach has a very, very, and again, I'm maybe caricaturing a coach here, where he says he wants everyone to jab like this, he wants everyone to kick like this, he wants everyone to fight like this, then that robs the training environment of a kind of a diversity that I think is crucial to be able to pick up and attune to. If I'm not mistaken, Sean travels around all different kinds of gyms. After losing to Pereira, he went down to train with him, so he's constantly adapting to the subtleties and the differences between different body types, between different styles, and all that stuff. And I think that's what I would attribute to him being so successful, even against Izzy. Izzy's a sniper, right? But Izzy's proven to be hittable, and I'm as every much as big a fan of Izzy's fighting as anyone else. I think he's tremendous, and I think if they fight again, it may be very different. But I wasn't that surprised stylistically that Sean was able to pull it off. And again, I attribute this to Sean's volume of sparring. Now, just to add again, to layer onto that, if you look at Sean's fight, it's the 1-2, it's the occasional kick, the odd lead teep that he's using. So his game is very, very. He's become a master of what he does. As a coach here again, and I'm not even suggesting I would have anything to improve. Well, maybe I'm suggesting that what we'd like to do, how to round your athlete out, might just be nudging him and giving him different problems within the sparring situation, so he can develop other parts of his game. For instance, I place no value in orthodox or southpaw. I try and get my students and athletes to constantly be switching up and changing and getting comfortable on both sides, so they just become well-rounded and adaptable. Adaptable is the key word, and they build all these little relationships, and they become sensitive to all the different kinds of information and all the different kinds of problems and challenges that they might see in a fight. Other than what might happen with our team, and I'm just thinking about it critically, we might not do so well against heavy brawlers, because we don't see that style in the gym all the time, because I don't have any tolerance for that.
Well, that does bring up, if we can get into more the specifics of then what kind of cues you are giving your athletes on how they should be developing their striking skills. If we keep it to a lead hand.
What do you mean by a cue?
Like, I mean, would you even to bring it back probably furthest, would you even do a physical demonstration with a partner of this is the game we're going to play?
Yeah, I for the most part I always demonstrate the games, but I'm showing them what to do rather than how to do it, if that makes sense. I'm not trying to be particularly technical at that. I give like Greg and that speaks. We're giving them end goals. A big thing that underpins, again, a big key feature of this way of learning is self-organization. And all self-organization means that the body will kind of self-organize to achieve the goal. Every coach believes in self-organization, even if it's the first time that they've kind of heard it. And I'm not trying to be a dick about it, but every coach believes in it. Even a coach is given the most minute of details, they still believe in some kind of self-organization. Because if we didn't, if you're telling someone, okay, you want to put your hand specifically on this part here, you're still relying on the self-organization of the arm and the body to get there. And so we all believe in it. We're just saying, we're taking it a step further and saying we're not really going to worry how the body manages to self-organize around the task. We're just going to give them these tasks, and over repeated exposure and the repeated opportunities to solve that problem, that the effective movement, I'm not even going to call it technique, will start to stabilize and emerge.
Sure. So, as it would be understandable, and I think then if we look at it, so when you would demonstrate the game and how it would to be played, the observing of how you would play it would also be giving information
Sure.
to the people who are watching how to play the game. So would you feel that even just as you demonstrate how to play the game, how you are moving would then be potentially replicated in some form
Sure.
by the students?
Yeah,
and then
sure.
Some of what you would be moving would be, I mean, I don't know, would it be things that would traditionally be taught just by drilling on the pads?
Sure.
Let's say, are you rolling a shoulder over to protect the chin? Common footwork things. I don't want to get bogged down in specifics, but
let's go to footwork here, okay? Because
footwork, perfect.
So I think training footwork in isolation is absurd, because footwork agility is information based. It's not a general skill, okay? So agility is the ability to change direction, okay, fluidly and dynamically. Now, if you're practicing footwork, and largely our foundations program is a footwork. I don't really don't give a shit. I mean, the punches take longer to develop because they're not trying to hit hard; they're just trying to tag each other. So my whole foundations program is really a footwork. It's really a footwork program with some. Again, I'm reluctant to use the words because I think they're just throwaway words, but it's building interpersonal distance management or range and footwork. The body doesn't want to fall over; it wants to stay stable for the most part. And if you're constantly moving and adjusting your base and trying to stay stable and stay upright and stay balanced while you're interacting with another partner, that is footwork. That is footwork to me. Footwork is just being able to be in a good posture so you're able to produce and receive force effectively. And I think to have the cones out and doing these fancy pivots and all this bullshit, I think it's absurd. I think it's a complete waste of time, unless you're trying to have some aesthetic quality that comes out at the end of it. So, and again, I challenge any coach, go and look at the highest level UFC and slow it down and look at the footwork. It's far from pretty. They're falling over their feet. They're leaving their hips in front. They're crossing their feet. They're all the things that 101 footwork would tell you are violations of good technique. They're apparent everywhere.
Yeah, and I think one thing with my own experience is that I've been experimenting using the ecological approach into some degree more and more, just with jiu-jitsu at the moment, and it's kind of seeing away what's the least amount of information I can give, that I'm comfortable giving, and seeing the results. And one thing that has been surprising to me is I can give very little information and then be looking around the room and be seeing pretty good outcomes. And it's not that much different than if I was to give a half an hour step-by-step, every single minute detail explanation, and then you get up and look around the room and it's not like everyone's robots and repeating it perfectly because I sat there explaining it. People's attention drifted off. It's it puts them in their own head, I believe now too, that I'm not doing it perfect. What was it again? I don't know how to do it.
What did coach say? Where's my hand meant to be? And again, you've heard. There's no need to revisit this. I think they've done that on other podcasts. I mean, again, we're picking positions here. This is an alternative, contrarian view, and if you don't agree with it, that's fine. It's not settled, but there's what seems to be pretty robust from the literature is this sense of internal versus external focus of attention. I don't know. Again, I would need to rewatch the fight, Izzy. It felt to me as the fight unfolded, Izzy started getting stuck in his head a bit more. I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, I would need to watch it again. I'm gonna talk a little bit about this later. It was almost that he was that old quip, paralysis by analysis. You could almost feel and see in real time as he kind of freezing up a little, which Izzy doesn't do. I mean, when he's at his best, he's so fluent, and it's just, he's in his flow state. And I feel he was knocked out a bit of that, and he could have quite literally been knocked out of that it might have been from that heavy punch he took in the first round. Maybe that caused them to start to unravel, very possibly. But this seems to be a robust finding in the literature, that if we give someone externally focused tasks, which mean what is the effect that your movement is having on the environment rather than how are you moving, I think that's really powerful and really strong. And just like you said, when you look around the room and they're not overthinking it, that's when you're seeing the best work.
Yeah, and I'm still experimenting with exactly what I'm comfortable with, how where I can go with it. But my first thought is, well, it's not drastically different from if I'd given the half-hour Danaher explanation versus just 1, 2, 3 kind of thing. Just work on this.
Well, the only argument I'd be, you've got an extra half hour of training.
Well, that's the benefit, right? That is that's an obvious benefit that is immediately visible to people. I'm still obviously just skeptical about how far things can be taken with that. I will be experimenting it with myself, more myself. But even this week, I was working.
Can I pick up on that question,
Sure.
Sonny? Again, it's your question how far we can take it. And going back to the original point, that's how the conversation's changing, right? Because when we even touched on this earlier. How can you start like that? How can you get far at all? How can you get anyone going with that? And now it's, well, maybe you can, but how far can you take them? So the goalposts for us are kind of moving, and I'm happy to run that experiment. I'm running that experiment right now. And this is why I'm kind of a little zealous about not doing any of the prescriptive stuff. And if you're really to scrutinize my practice, like I think you're kind of doing that to an extent. You're saying, well, do you show them stuff and that? The ecological dynamics, that doesn't preclude you giving people information or demonstrations. What we're saying is it plays a lesser role, and we're not relying on it. And the students aren't trying to mimic or copy you, so to speak. What you're doing is you're guiding them and you're giving them ideas. I don't care even what my technique looks like. I'm showing the basic games. But yeah, sorry, back to you.
Yeah, well, that did make me think one interesting anecdote that happened last week. But as I was explaining rules of a game with an uke, as I was talking through one of the goals, remove the heel from the hip, they instinctively, as a good uke does, did what would be considered good, good technique of how to remove it. That was it. Mm-hmm. Didn't touch on it again. But then as I looked around the room playing the game, I actually noticed people were doing it as the uke had unintentionally given them the information on what to do. So that was an interesting thing for me, that then also made me think, well, if people, they're not doing martial arts generally in a bubble, they're also watching UFC on the weekend.
Absolutely.
They're probably getting fed stuff on Instagram.
All the time.
They're looking around the room, obviously learning from the fellow training partners. And there probably is enough information, from those sources that they're going to be able to pick up a lot if they're paying attention to it, which then of course let's start thinking, okay, well then, at what stage do we peel it back? Because I would think that, a common criticism, and I'd go back to grappling here because this is one thing I've dealt with more at the moment, is that people will say that it's just situational sparring. We've always done that. It is, this is nothing new. It's been done over and over again, and I think so is, I guess maybe I'll just give you a chance to respond to that, because my belief is that, well, it's not exactly specific sparring. You might be able to say it's a form of situational sparring, but it's more, refined or or however you want to place it, it's obviously evolved.
So two things there. One side can dumb it down and say, well, that's just all it is, and then we can make more out of it than it is and try and articulate it and package it up and make it flowery and fluffy. But I think situational sparring is something that's a very, very kind of powerful part of the ecological approach. And so I'm okay to call it situational sparring, where it's sparring, it's unscripted, it's non-cooperative to an extent, there's decision making, it's all great, right? And you're putting someone in a small slice of the game because you can't play the entire game every time, because you're trying to nudge people into areas where they're picking up on like in jiu-jitsu is the most obvious option there, because we've got all these different configurations that we need to work on and all these areas that we need to get sensitive to. So it's a challenge in jiu-jitsu, right? How do you best allocate your training time to different positions? But again, this brings me back to striking, where striking is hard. It's very hard, but it's simple to an extent. And I know we're talking about striking today, but MMA is a fun sport to coach too, again, because there's so much grappling and wall entanglements and stuff. And if you want to, our foundations program for MMA is mostly grip fighting, shoot boxing to close distance and stuff, and a great deal of wall fighting and wall entries. And it's really pretty cool to see how competent quickly the students get at these like MMA scrambles, entanglements, clinches and stuff, just by focusing purely on a couple of key principles and whatnot. And I just keep them in that game. And I don't worry about all the kind of the fancy little techniques and stuff. They can be added later on. I'm trying to build a real strong foundation for the sport, and that comes down to a few key areas for me. In striking, again, it's being able to tag and not being tagged. It's effective footwork in the sense that you're able to stay stable and posturally ready, and just building that unique relationship with distance and space, which I think Sean Strickland has become a master at. It's not that Izzy wasn't throwing, it was just that he was just able to deflect, redirect, or just fade out the way.
Yeah, and so I guess in that, I think it is reasonable to be like, hey, yep, it is situational sparring, and you may not agree with this, but I think, it could be a way to move people or open up conversation of like, yeah, it is situational sparring. Situational sparring is pretty good. That's why we all do it. We're trying to maximize the amount of time we spend situational sparring because we believe it's an excellent teaching tool.
That's the key part, Sonny. I'm trying to maximize the time. I'm trying to milk every single minute, and I want every single minute to be somewhat representative and always live and always a little chaotic. I'm just trying to get, if I've got 60 minutes, how can I milk every one of these minutes and get as much game-like exchanges as I can. And I think it's been a pretty powerful way. Again, we've been doing, our fight team, our grappling team have been doing reasonably well, considering. I don't put a great deal of I don't, of course, I celebrate wins at the amateur level and whatnot, but amateur is a tough sport. There can be random mismatches and whatnot. I think actually as you progress, matches get a little bit closer. So I don't put a great deal of value in amateur results, but it's been really reassuring to see that the kids that have come through with me that have purely come through this process are able to go in the cage and really look pretty good.
Yeah, so I think that would be it's a reasonable way to put it, of just like trying to maximize that, maximize the amount of time spent live in situational sparring, because it's believed that that is an excellent teaching and learning tool, and trying to make the specific scenarios the most representative and beneficial to the student as possible. That doesn't seem that controversial. The only thing that would seem to get, I would say, would still get pushback is probably what I'm experimenting with now is just the amount of potential information that you could give. So I think that, so like for the first game, hit and don't get hit.
What do you mean by that, Sonny? The amount of information that the student can handle, or the amount of information? Are you talking about environmental information, or the amount of cues and information a coach is given?
Yeah, the amount of cues and information that a coach would give. Do we give them ideas? Hey, these are the rules of the game. Things to pay attention to. Things about space. Be thinking tactically of how you will close that space and move away from that space. Or was your description of hit and don't get hit, tag the shoulder, was that the extent of what you'll do?
Yeah, I keep it as basic as that. I think all the rest is just unnecessary fluff and blathering. I don't see value in, and I can do that now when I occasionally, and I'll do it just to let them see and remind myself. Occasionally we'll do a little drill, and it's just awful. People are, because they're just not used to it. They're good at what the athletes in my environment are good at now is you set them a little game, you set them a little goal, and they get after it. And they get after it in all their very own unique ways. And if perception, again, this is, we believe that expertise is becoming sensitive to and detecting information. And I'm using information in the sense of kinematics, the visual system, pressure, touch, all that thing. And the more and more we get sensitive to, that's where expertise emerges, and that's where it resides. So it doesn't make any sense to me. It's not like I'm trying to. I am trying to make a point in one sense to see if we can do it without the traditional prescriptive stuff. But it wouldn't make sense for me to do it because I don't believe that's what has value for developing skills.
Okay, so it's because I want you to, I guess, to just take me through one of your games. Yeah.
So
take me through a practice
from a beginner.
Yeah, because a question I did have was then how you would differentiate when from beginners to people who've been doing it longer or whatever. But I do a shoulder touch game for a warm up for my MMA classes, and the idea that that would be all of the class, perhaps.
Okay. So
is so far removed.
Yeah,
from,
and again,
I can't see it.
It's an example I use a lot, right? Like shoulder tag, and think, well, you're just going to come in and play shoulder tag for the whole hour. That would seem to get a little stale. And so let me take you through. So I'm not picking. I'll take you briefly through the practice we run last night for novices. So I'll come in and we'll start them off. Start them off boxing. So no head contact boxing. I'll have them go orthodox, lefty, righty, righty, lefty, lefty, lefty. That makes sense. So they're already switching around. Their stances getting a different look. Their opponent's they're either the same stance, opposite stance, or they're both in opposite stance. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So that is a change between rounds. You'll get them to change.
So that'll be the first, just a warm up. So look, just a move and warm up. So and then we'll talk, lefty versus righty, or righty versus lefty. Same thing, really. I'll put a little bit of emphasis on owning that ground in between you and your partner, and having an active lead hand. Okay. Again, I don't think it's necessary at that stage. We can talk about narrowing your partner's field of play, which is moving around to your right. It could be protecting the rear flank, this kind of stuff. I don't worry too much about that. I get them moving in that space, and then, depending on the skill or the area that we're working, and yesterday it was switch kicks, I'll start layering that in. So again, as a warm up, I'll have them kick, block, return. So they're throwing a body kick, either a right kick or a switch kick at each other, and they're blocking and they're returning. So again, this is stripped back. It's most simple form. There's a little bit of decision making in. So they have to perceive and pick up on am I getting kicked to the lead side or the rear side? So there's a little bit of decision. This is still sparring to me. You're not quite sure. It's a two weapon spar, right? There's only two things allowed. I can kick you with the right, or I can kick you with the left, and you're going back and forward. But this is just a warm up. And for beginners, I'll say you have two big shields. Hide behind your shield. And for the attackers, I say couple of things that's going to give you a reasonably good kick. I'm looking for a lift and a turn, lift and a turnover. So these are the kind of cues I'll give, and but I'm not. I think it's absurd to what do we expect from beginners? And if we're expecting them to look and move competently and smoothly, I think that is a massive. I don't think that's possible. You know, I remind my students as well that clumsiness is a feature of learning. It's not a bug. So when it looks clunky, and, you know, again, I'm trying to avoid buzzwords today, and they say freezing the degrees of freedom while the body figures it out. It's moving these really gross kind of movement patterns, and it looks clunky. And whenever we're trying to develop a new skill, and over time it loosens up because the body's learning to synergize, this is how I get them moving for the warm-up. Okay, so we're past that. I'm sorry, I don't want to drag this out. I said I'd do it quickly. So then we start moving on to our meat and potatoes of which is switch kicks, right? So we'll talk a little bit about when you switch and how you switch would largely be dependent on where your partner is in space. So we can step forward as we switch, we can do a static switch, we can just do a lead. So last night, I'm trying to recall exactly what we did last night. I have one of the partners, the defender, just moving in and out, playing around with that range and that space, and the attacker has to find himself or close the range or get within range to throw the kick. And so again, a little bit of decision making and getting in. How am I going to effectively land this kick on a moving partner? Then we'll add some. Then we'll do that back and forward for a little bit. Then I might say, okay, we're going to steal with counter attacks off this. So this time when the switch kick comes in, I want you to block it. I want you to throw something back. I don't care what it is. Throw something back. Attacker, you be ready. Okay, you're looking to land the kick and be right back to your base effectively to deal with what's coming. This is the very most stripped back, simple form of sparring for me, but it's still sneaking in and squeezing in some decision making and some variability and some unpredictability. And then we'll just start scaling on top of that, and then we'll maybe work an underhand catch, the same thing. I'm never telling people, if they do this, you do that, to the extent that once they block the point, oh, what did coach say? Am I throwing a kick or a point? Do what the body's telling you to do. And over the course of the foundations, we'll build up to an open spar where I'm encouraging them to throw lots of switch kicks so they get lots of opportunities to defend, to set up, to counter, to perceive them, and to find ways to pick up when they can throw them. Because the technique in it itself is one thing, it's how do you land it? That's the important part of striking. There's countless coaches, students, hobbyists out there that have impeccable technique. They're probably shite at fighting though.
Well, it is funny. A common joke I make is, give me, a short amount of time you can get everyone looking good on pads, but can they fight, right? But as you explained the class then, I mean, it seems completely reasonable. And as if you're throwing a kick, lift the knee, turn it over. Yep. For a beginner's first time, probably that level of information, looking around the room. I could imagine, I haven't done it myself, but is it going to be radically different from if you'd given a 10-minute step-by-step, blow-by-blow, detailed description of how to move every little muscle?
Yes, it's radically different in the sense that these 10 minutes of each class add up, and over the course of weeks and months, I'm going to have hours, or my students are going to have hours and hours of more of live, unscripted work than sit and listen to me blabber and blather, So yeah, I put them in right away. I do very low amount of virtually no explicit instruction, as in this is how I want you to move. But again, I'll use demos and stuff. In fact, today I have a coach coming from the Straight Blast gym. He's in town. He's going to come and run a class for us because we're friends. And I'm running an MMA class tonight, which we're going to record and upload because I'm going to start doing that too. And it'll give you an inkling or an idea of how we run a MMA class. Just so I'm not here talking, I'm actually going to put it out there.
Yeah, I'd be fascinated to see that, because I mean, SBG, obviously the aliveness. What was it?
3I method.
Isolation. The 3I method. That's another common pushback I hear, that they were doing this a long time ago.
And they were. I spoke with Adam in a podcast a couple back, and I showed the respect due, I feel, because I named the episode Standing on the Shoulders of the Aliveness Giant, right? Because Matt Thornton's been talking about this for a long time. Now, there's this initial stage, and this is the challenge Adam has, because he has the same concerns. How do we get people started, or get them to such a stage where they can then start adding a liveliness? All I'm saying is I'm adding the liveliness immediately. And then that's a valid debate and discussion. As so is the intensity of sparring, right? Now, I spoke about threshold at the start of the podcast. How hard does a hit in the head need to be before it starts having deleterious effects? I think it's a lot less than we think, and the research is starting to show it's a lot less than we think. But again, it's very complex. What's a hit in the head for you over time, or multiple hits in the head, might be radically different from how it would affect me. There's all sorts of things going on, but we know it's not good for you, and it's a lack of a duty of care in my eyes to have students come in and bash each other in the head without being constantly informed and told to be mindful and of the consequences of it. And that's why I don't allow head contact for under 18s. Now, I know, again, you come from a different culture there. These kids have got, there's socio-economic culture pressures out there that are different. I'm not picking from that demographic. And to say if you're under 18, there's no head contact whatsoever, that's arbitrary, right? Because why should it be 18? Why shouldn't it be 25 when the brain's fully developed? Why shouldn't it be a time where they've developed enough skill? I don't know. I had to pick something. Here, you're an adult and you're expected to be able to make your own informed choices by 18, so I don't allow any head contact for under 18s. And I have a team of teenagers who just come in and scrap every night. They fuck around for the most part, and they're not even listening anyway. And they're just off in the corner scrapping and wrestling and hitting each other, but they don't hit each other in the head. And I think that's really something I've been pretty proud of, because as they approach 18, they'll have this healthy respect for brain health and whatnot. And I take no pleasure whatsoever when I see 12, 13, 14-year-olds all padded up and beating the fuck out of each other. I think it's, again, I'm careful what I say. You're from a different part of the world, a different culture. But in this culture here, I think it's borderline negligence.
Well, I think everyone probably knew getting hit in the head's not a great idea.
And yet the sport's growing exponentially.
Yeah, it's probably not good, and the science is coming to back it up.
We do a lot of shit that's not good for us, right?
Yeah,
such is the nature of the beast.
Exactly. And if someone wants to be a professional athlete, that probably comes with the territory that there's going to be things that they do that is.
And we need to be realistic, right? For everyone that comes in the gym with the aspiration of being a UFC fighter or whatever, I don't know if you want to even hazard a guess of what the percentage or the likelihood of that is. I don't even know if it's certainly single figures in percentage wise. It might be a fractions, most likely fractions. And then getting to the UFC, I have this conversation with a few of the fighters I know. Getting to the UFC is one thing. Staying in the UFC or one of these big organizations and becoming financially free and creating a financial life and having success is they're two totally different aspirations. So I think we need to be serious with our athletes, and I've provided an environment where people can come in and fight and never get hit in the head if they want. And for those who do want to, I just continue to tell them, this is they're adults. I'm not going to prohibit or ban it because they'll go elsewhere. So we just have that conversation every day. And I don't tolerate the hard sparring, and that's a pushback that I've had, and it's a pushback that I was concerned about. Will it show up in the cage? Will they be able to deal with this pressure in the cage when someone's trying to take the fucking head off? And for the most part, and increasingly now, these kids that are coming through, that have purely come through this and only been training for a year and a half, it wasn't an issue.
And then would you put them through different games to try and increase levels of pressure, or do it change the environment, like play some crowd music in the background or anything?
Yes, we do about that. So we have a cage. This is probably looks like it's backwards right now, but we have a cage in the gym now, which has been, I'm hesitant to use the word game changer, but it's given them a lot more awareness of where they are, because prior to that we were just out in the open mats, and when we got into the cage, especially these regional small amateur shows, they're tiny cages. Take 2 steps back and you're on the cage. But now that we've got the cage, it adds a little level of representativeness. But the reason I'm showing you my t-shirt, I don't know if you call it pancration on your end of the world, but this is MMA without head strikes. I'm enormously passionate about this. We're about to run our 9th event at the end of the month. I got over 30 fights lined up. We wrap them up. We have we stream it. We have a commentator. We gas them up. We play music as they come out. We try and create that real MMA vibe without getting hit in the head. And they fight ferociously. And I'm really passionate about this, because I think what we've done typically is the jump from the gym to the amateur level, and I'm not sure how is amateur fighting in Australia. Is it shin pads? Is it headgear? Is it
different? There's different classes. So we do have pancration, or I think it would be considered as like C class, no headshots.
Okay. Right.
And then B class, no headshots, shin pads. B class, headshots. I think with shin pads, and then A class, no shin pads. No elbows to the head, but strikes to the head, and then.
Are you talking kickboxing or MMA?
MMA.
Okay, so
and then kickboxing has a similar system. So, I wish there was more of the pancration style events. Actually, too. I feel locally there's not enough of them. I think
it's wonderful, and anyone who wants to be on our fight team has to show that they can routinely deal with that pressure of having people watching them, of getting in and being able to compete in pancration. So we put them through that first. Here in the States, especially my state too, it's generally a jump right to amateur. Now in amateur kickboxing, they do wear headgear, which again, this is another story we've told ourselves that we're protecting fighters. The science doesn't seem to support that at all, and so we don't train with headgear, because I don't think it has value. Plus, we're not hitting each other that hard. So in kickboxing, there is shin guards and headgear, but for MMA, to jump into MMA, it's the gloves can. In fact, the gloves I think can sometimes be 6 ounce, but otherwise they're the same gloves. You're just not allowed to elbow, no elbows, and it's 3-minute rounds. There's a couple of other small changes, but for the most part, it's a full fight. And then the crowd that are coming to watch are expecting UFC level blood and knockouts at the amateur level. I'm not thrilled with the amateur level, but it is what it is. There's a way you want the world to be, and the way it is. So. One of the solutions we've had is to try and get our team in as many pancration events as possible, as much grappling, as much competition as possible, before they're ready to make that jump, which I think here is a massive leap from the gym to your first amateur fights. Knockouts in amateur fighting should, in my opinion, be infrequent, and that's not the case here, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's probably the same. The highest level of amateur is essentially just pro without elbows in MMA.
And we skip to that right away. So there's no kind of middle ground or onboarding here, and it's tough, because it hurts our sport in many ways, because imagine your son gets into MMA and they want to go in a fight, and you go and watch him. You see him get his lights turned out in the fight. It doesn't help. It doesn't really help the sport. We're in a precarious situation here. I know in the UK they're starting. There's been some deaths in white collar boxing and stuff. So the whole thing could crumble down if agencies and commissions start following the lead, and they start playing this game of who's protecting the fighters more than. And so we need to be careful here. I think there's room and there's a role to be played for these kind of events and bringing fighters on slowly. Because I've had a lot of pancration fighters do that. Fuck that. If this is a pancration fight, there's no way I'm going in. So it was a good way for them to find out that, you know what, this probably isn't for me, without getting all dinged up.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a compelling picture of, you know, a safer way to teach the sport, more time spent sparring and live work, and then which could potentially, or I guess your pitch would be that it would lead to a better acquisition of skills, right?
Well, that's always my pitch. It's funny,
Yeah,
because people disregard pancreation and think it's not really a real fight. We've become civilized over the centuries and that. Could you imagine going back to the Colosseum or whatever now and saying, okay, we're going to put on these gloves now, and you're not allowed to gouge each other's eyes out or headbutt. No hitting on the back of the head, and there'll be a referee to stop in case you get in trouble. We're progressing as a species. We're trying to stay within the sport and keep it kind of primitive and real, but at the same time, let's make it a sustainable sport and put the health of the athletes, prioritize it as best we can, not just in fights but in the training room. And pad work is orders of magnitude safer than even light sparring. So I have to be careful here because I'm talking out two sides of my mouth, right? I'm talking about safety, but I'm also an advocate for always and only sparring. So I have to navigate that and use my best judgment of where that line is and that changes for different people, for different aspirations, and that's a constant work in progress for me. Yeah,
'cause, I mean, that's something that I've seen and just concerned when doing when just punching to the body, or body sparring might be something we do, and shots hitting the shoulder, slipping up, people getting hit anyway. Do we just chalk that up to just
So another thing
inevitable?
Another thing I try and bake into the foundations pie is this because you'll see all the time we talk about even in grappling that they talk about your spazzy white belts or whatever. They're just not able to regulate force, and I think by doing this, we'll bring it back to sparring and kickboxing. I think by starting out this way, and again, constant reminders. I'm always looking for speed. One of our mantras is speed up, power down. But I'm always looking for speed, but I'm not impressed. In fact, I'll kind of chastise them if they're kicking and punching too hard. They start to build this, they start to get better at regulating force. And I think that carries on for when they're ready to go up and to spar. And for most of my guys, there's some of them, they're wild fuckers, right? I got to spray them down with cold water sometimes. But for the most part, they don't really even enjoy sparring hard because they're not able to explore, they're not able to experiment. And I've got it into their head now that, look after your noggin. We only get so many hits. Don't give them away in the gym.
Yeah, so a question from that would be, what how do you chastise them to regulate their force? Like, what do you say? I mean,
tell them stop being a dick. Just be like, behave yourself or you're out.
Yeah, that's okay. That's similar to what we might say.
Yeah,
just ease up. Take some heat off that one.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
And it's not for everyone.
Right, so
we'll get people coming in and they'll be swinging and they think they're in a death match on their first day in foundations. And that's why I don't. That's why in foundations, and I've played around, but this is a conversation about Adam. These people can go to the head, but these people it's just a non-negotiable for me. You have to come through this program. I need to see that you're exercising control and respect for your training partner, and then and only then will we be able to have the discussion about leveling up.
And then, so what does it look like in your gym when they do level up? Like what additional skills are you attempting to get your students to acquire?
Okay, so a couple of things. Let's go back to, you mentioned about we're constantly absorbing techniques. We're watching fights. There's social media. There's instructors and that. This reverse classroom thing, I think is your buddy Lachlan is an advocate for that. Okay, I think we're all running a reverse classroom in a sense. This isn't like the old days where you had to seek out some kind of master and they were going to show you. It's in your face all the time. And I think that builds in this certain creativity and this explorative nature of certainly the fighters and the athletes that come into my gym. And they'll try shit out. They'll try shit at the scene. And I give them a tremendous amount of opportunity to do this, to come in and try and scratch your own itch, because what works for Jim probably doesn't interest Bob. Sally is doing something else. These are my generic names I'm throwing out. But And so again, this pushes me further and further away for having a one size fits all or a one strategy fits all. We were talking about this the other day, Sonny. Again, we have a lot of Mexican kids in the gym, and they're generally vertically challenged, a little on the shorter side. And we have this idea of a Mexican style, right? What does Mexican style mean to you? It's lots of bobbing, weaving. It's kind of coming forward. It's closing pressure. It's closing the distance. What's created that style? Is that just a Mexican thing? The Mexican fighters thought we're going to do this, or has that emerged organically through the natural constraints of Mexican fighters generally being a little shorter? They've generally had to adapt and to common problems, and then this becomes like a reinforced through socio-cultural ideas that now I'm a Mexican, this is what we do, and this kind of snowballs to this effect. But it's reciprocal. It's a relationship. The reason that style has appeared is probably due to, one of the factors is probably because they're generally a little shorter fighters. They lack a little range generally. That's probably why you don't see that come through in maybe other countries and cultures and environments like Dutch or whatever. They're all 6 foot plus. So there's all sorts of, like, to your point, there's all sorts of things that are informing our practice and our form of life. They call it your umwelt, which is like this word that I love. That's this the unique relationship you're having with your environment, and there's all sorts of things, like you're saying, that are coming in and contributing towards that.
Yeah, and so if I'm understanding that when people level up for you, my gut feeling was that it was going to be you would put more constraints on to try and refine more, certain skills or something like that. But it's actually the opposite, that you will.
It depends. It depends what we try to do. So this is interesting with constraints, especially as newer people are maybe either interested or they're coming into the space. This constraint's a new tool, right? So it's like this. They've got this hammer, and just fucking everything looks like a nail. We're going to just over constrain for the sake of constraining, and that's completely forgivable, because I think that's what I did for the longest time. Hey, I've got this new way of doing things, and I'm going to constrain here, and you can't do this. And if the rules of the game become even more complicated than just showing them the fucking technique, then you've missed the point. So
yeah.
Depending on what I'm trying to, the skill or the strategy I'm trying to elicit, that'll dictate what kind of constraints I'm going in. But for the most part, it's we might have a high. One of the Skillet guys I spoke with my podcast, he put it very nicely, and it changed for me. Where rather than turn things off or remove things, we're turning the volume up on certain strategies and tactics. So we're still trying to keep the game somewhat whole in the more advanced classes, but we have a kind of end goal or a strategy they're trying to work on. And that might be lateral movement, that might be a certain, low to high and level changing and all this kind of stuff. And again, being as representative as possible, I go back and forward with this, but for most of our striking classes, they generally involve the threat of takedown. Generally, sometimes not, but generally, because that again in itself is a constraint. And we tend to do this in the sport, right? We'll do our kickboxing here, we'll do our wrestling here, we'll do our grappling here, and we'll put it all together. And you can't strike, the way you strike in absence of the threat of a takedown is different from the way you strike when there is a threat of a takedown. So we're just trying to make it a little bit more holistic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. So I guess, how most traditional gyms would have a syllabus that is then split by levels of particular techniques that you must know, you must learn, or katas, whatever. You may level a class by the skills that you are aiming for a student to acquire during.
Yeah, and again, what kind of skill set can we require in a class? This is something that evolves over time. Like, for instance, if like we do a lot of wall work, if you're routinely and I mean routinely against different partners, able to stuff takedowns and stop getting taken down on the wall, to find your underhooks, to break the grips, to move your hips. If that's routinely happening, then that for me is that's evident of the game starting to pay off, and this manifesting in some kind of skill, right? So I try not to chase all the shiny objects and say, we're working on this today and we're working on this next day. I try and keep it, for the most part, just playing the game and just nudging them into different spaces. Or if I see them getting too stale or stagnant or relying too much on one particular area, and I might not even do that. Again, all my fighters have got different body shapes, they've got different traits, they've got different temperaments, they've got different capacities of flexibility and speed and all that. So they need to find what works for them uniquely. And so for the most part, I let them go. I set the games and let them go and figure it out. And then I let them do their own games a lot. A lot of the classes, because giving your athlete autonomy, that's fascinating research as well, Sonny. They'll bring golfers in or whatever in these tests, and just by letting them choose the color of the ball, giving your athlete some kind of autonomy, some kind of ownership, some kind of feeling that they've got a say in their training, tends to lead to better performance outcomes.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Having that autonomy to direct training. I mean, that's where I think where you look at those outliers that we bring up before, like Tony Ferguson, or it seems like they are able to have autonomy over their training, and that's what has ultimately led them to get good.
Well, that can go both ways, right? Because it depends. Again, here's me with no buzzwords, but there's a tendency for people to have either kind of this fixed mindset or this growth mindset, where if you give someone too much autonomy and they're kind of fixed and rigid and they only train to which is this guy here, right? I need to be pushed. I need to be pushed into areas.
I think we can all probably think of a couple of people.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at myself here. I tended to be like that, right? That's the reason I had a baseball highlight, is because that was my A game, and that was I'm looking for it every time, and I became very, very good at that because that was my thing. That was to the detriment of almost every other technique in jiu-jitsu, but I was able to pull that off routinely. So again, there's no one answer here. Ecological dynamics is approach. It's a perspective and an understanding of the way we learn, but it must by its very nature include the individuality of the student, and that's why it's really important to me. So I tend not to have a one-size-fits-all, and I give my students a ton of room for autonomy and let them explore and find what works for them.
Very, very interesting, Scott. And I'm wondering maybe if we can wrap things up, a good way might be if you can explain how I walk into my gym one day, everyone's trying the no-gi baseball bat choke through an ecological lens.
Well, I learned it ecologically. I don't know. I forget who taught me. I used to train under Red Schaefer. I believe he's shown me at one stage. He actually uses a different grip. It's really the gripping and mechanics. My old arthritic fingers have probably caused that through this baseball choke. It takes a lot of grip strength. But here's the key on the baseball choke. If you're shown in video. Most of the grips, they're either going for a gable or S grip, and it's actually an elongated S grip. So you're right on the end of the fingers because you make a heart shape rather than a V shape, and this is what's going to get the carotids. While you're gassing me up, Sonny, you can go and check out Scott Sievewright's baseball choke finishes. And contrary to the pushback, there's some high-level guys on there that have succumbed to it. So. Charlie Radke is one of them. Charlie was we spoke about my boy Charlie, an absolute savage and absolutely deserves to be in the UFC. But his post, I wasn't expecting him anyway. But his post fight speech, I was like, oh Charlie, what would do?
So Yeah, it's something it does stick in my mind that phase where everyone went through nogi baseball at chokes, which would just driven by trends through observing, just observing videos online, and all of a sudden everyone's going for it. In fact, there's one guy who did it, and he still goes for it. And if you catch a slip, and if you're not careful, and that was all just from just
Yep.
observing
It was it
what was
was
going
it
on
was
in the
something
world.
that was personal to me. It was a relationship I've built. I can only do it on the one side because again, I'm a shitty student. I don't try it on the other side. My jiu-jitsu is very one-sided. I don't know about yours. I think most people's jiu-jitsu is generally kind of one-sided. I don't push myself to round out my game on the other side. So yeah, I'm very competent at that from the one side. But it was something that I enjoyed. It was something that I built this personal relationship, being able to routinely, again, that's my metric for skill. I was able to routinely pull it off against all kinds of body types, all kinds of levels, when I tried it. But I don't believe I ever drilled it. Perhaps I did at one stage. And your point being, I think we're just scratching the surface of this skillfulness that is going to appear in martial arts. I was at ADCC Open this weekend. There's 15 and 16-year-olds in the men's division, giving them fits. The game is changing, largely due to the sharing of information, largely due to progressive training methodologies. But to your point, every single move, technique, whether it be MMA, even the sport itself, all emerged ecologically and organically. And that kind of helps me make my point, I think. Maybe a good play, maybe a good time to start rounding off now there, right?
Yeah, we'll finish on that note, because it's something I'll be discussing more of, because I think it is an interesting thing to explore, and particularly what you mentioned, that even if we take that approach, that's standing on the shoulder of giants, it's like, okay, what's the least amount? How much are we throwing away here? That's where I'm at the moment.
That's important, right? I think we're going to lose a lot if we can't come to. I'm generally too agreeable, right? Greg Souders is light years ahead of most coaches, and I think we can agree. And if he's listening, he's not quite as agreeable as me. And that's apparent, but I think there is an overlap, and I think it's just being true to what you think your approach is. I think for the most part, there's an opportunity here, because I think traditional training has just really been throwing shit at the wall and copying and repeating what generations have done before us. And like everything else, life rolls on, right? Maybe we'll come back full circle. I don't know, but this seems like a potent way to build skills. A lot of the pushback I get, I'm finding over time, these arguments start to crumble, and I'm excited. My vision's still clear, and we'll wait and see. A lot of scrutiny on us, right? Because we're out there saying we don't fucking drill and we don't do this pad work and that. So people can't wait to see us get smashed. But yeah, that drives me to get it. That drives me to dial it in even further.
That happens no matter what you're doing. Sometimes if you're taking any kind of position, and it's also what can drive interest. So yeah, fascinating. I want to explore it more. I mean, that even made me think there of agreeableness and disagreeableness. How much does the temperament of a coach,
right,
and their personality come into play, or their emotional state?
It's everything. This is the whole thing about being embodied and I'm largely an embodied cognition. Even having this discussion, everything, what we eat, you're on a different time zone and everything, it all affects the way we interact and relate with the world. And so to say we have non-linearity is the basis of the ecological approach, is saying we don't really know. We've got some ideas of what makes people skillful. We've got some ideas of what makes people motivated. We've got some ideas about how people learn, and we're just going to kind of put them in that space. I think the traditional model tends to, again, I'll flip that back. That if we do A, it will result in B, and I don't think we can ever do that. So the games that I share, or the information I share, or say that this is a way that I've found, I don't know. It's an experiment that I'm running, and I'm just following the principles of the science and what it's telling me. That's all we're doing. We'll wait and find out. But we'll find out sooner or later, because my whole goal is transfer. Can I make it work? How far can we take this? And I'm not going to put that on an outlier. As I forget who said it, show me your worst student. And I'm continually just amazed at some of the kids that come in who have seem illiterate as far as movement goes, and they're able to pick up skills that just work for them over time. It's beautiful to watch. So I get the most enjoyment out of seeing my beginners thrive and develop. The outliers will come and go.
Yeah. Keep going on this, because that even brought up, we had a kid who pulled off a triangle choke first go just because he saw it in the UFC video game.
Yeah,
what?
I'd say, see if you saw it in fucking Batman last week. Come in and try it.
All right, Scott. So now you have your own podcast, the Primal MMA Coaching Podcast, where you do explore these topics in depth. There's lots of people out there that you have spoken to that go into depth for that. So if people want to get in touch with you, check out the podcast, visit the gym, what's the best way for them to do that?
Never mind that, Sonny. Get me Andy from School of Grappling. You're my link. I'm teasing him. He's almost here, and he says, "I'll get back to me in a couple of weeks," and then I can't. But yes, if they want to they can get in touch. I'm very receptive. I love talking to other coaches and trying to figure this out, as a community. And it's a Primal MMA Coaching Podcast. Lots of academics. Now, I'm purely now, again, for better or worse, I try to stick squarely in the ecological space. Again, people pull me out of it, and I've got my own self-doubts about it, and I'm still open to think there's another part to the story, but the most part, that's what we explore. And I love your podcast, Sonny, and I keep an eye on. It's wonderful to see your gym thriving and you rubbing shoulders with all the UFC bigwigs. Good for you, man. I'm thrilled for you.
It's a crazy time, and I mean, all this stuff is interesting, and that's just, I like exploring interests and keeping motivated and exciting, and that's what that's what I enjoy doing. Yeah. That's why I got into martial arts.
And it's great. I'm sure, like the pod for me, I don't know. I mean, it's resulted in this, right? Us speaking, but you start these little endeavors, these little side hobbies, and the doors that start to open and the opportunities is great. So keep at it, brother.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Scott. Really appreciate your time today. See if I can get in touch with Andy. He's a hard man to pin down. But the teaser, if people are still listening, is that I know he has a different take on just purely ecological. And
if he does come on, he's not a guy to bullshit, or he'll sniff bullshit out immediately. So I better have my fucking ducks in a row, and it won't be at 7 o'clock in the morning. I can assure you that.
But he's a hard man to pin down. So, well, thanks so much, Scott. I really appreciate your time. I hope you have a great day, and we'll do it again some other time.
Okay, and I apologise for the salty language. I was trying to keep it down, but I'm an old Scotsman and an old seaman. So, okay.
All good, mate. All good.
All right,
no
brother.
worries at all.
Best.
You have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers, mate.
You have been listening to the Sonny Brown Breakdown. Until next time, you can visit sonnybrown.net to find out more ways to break it down.